18:30.
So
I'm sitting comfortably shall we begin? Carol. Hello, we are now going to...
I'm a bit deaf, it's my age.
I will speak up then. Yeah.
Can't be there.
Okay, we'll start the meeting now, and item 1, Chair's opening remarks. I do have some comments, but they fit in with various actions, so there's another saying out of context of those. Number 2, apologies for absence received. Chloe?
We've received apologies from Councillor Morehouse, Councillor Marie to work, and Councillor Tollins.
Thank you. Nothing from Ben Garrett?
No.
No, okay. Declarations of interest. To receive any declarations of disclosable pecuniary interests from members in respect of business to be transacted on the agenda. Anything, I think we're all okay there. Number 4, minutes of the Heritage and Townscape Committee. To receive the minutes of the Heritage and Townscape Committee held on Wednesday the 21st of May 2025, and to consider any matters arising from those minutes not covered elsewhere in this agenda. And if we can have a... Are we happy to go forward with any comments? Anybody? You're going to propose? Second. And I think we can just... Yep.
I wasn't there, so I wouldn't like to comment.
No. We'll move on from that. Number 5, review of the action log. And members to consider the Heritage Townscape action and the project log. Move through this fairly rapidly. Here we go. Right, from the top. Right, members to consider a report from the Sandwich Environment Conservation Group. And I see there's a note in green here. And so 210525, climate change to July 2025 agenda, which we have done. Contractor completed work restoring the plaques on the War Memorial. I think that's now July 2025 ongoing.
It's on the, I'm still actually now having trouble to speak to that. It's ongoing now.
Right, okay then. So hopefully we can eventually remove this from the action log. And going to the next one. The bus shelter. I note there's a verbal update to be given.
So the town clerk has actually managed to make contact with BBC, and they are looking at the way of providing the breaks down.
Right.
The finances in terms of the end of the project.
I think that's what you'd asked, is that correct?
Yeah. Rather than one-liner.
Yeah.
Are we happy with
I'm not happy with it.
comments? Basically, bus shelter. Watch this space, I think, is the best comment there. Next one. Yes, of course.
May I just ask, when something like this happens, and I'm glad you've got the response, but are we not allowed to say, so we need the response by? Because, I mean, to say they're looking at it, they'll do it. I mean, are we not able to say, thank you, but we need this by such and such a day?
We can do.
I mean, I'm not saying they'll do it, but I think it just adds a bit of impetus. It does add a bit of impetus to what you're trying to achieve.
Yes.
Because, I mean, they can say, oh yeah, we're still looking.
I think in that case it's a case of asking the mayor to write and say, what's going on.
Yeah, so the town clerk is engaging, and the answer we got back was not, we're looking at it. We had an answer back, but I said to the town clerk it wasn't acceptable. So I asked the town clerk to go back and say, actually, we want a proper explanation of the statement you've made, which was a one-liner. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right, this is with regards to Ainsley Court. Now, Councillor Pennington wished to be involved in the project, yes. If we can leave that until the disability access strategy, because I think that is more appropriate there.
Yeah.
Leave that to one side so that the green comments can be read there. Kent Resilience Forum with regard to Network Rail. Councillor Flack.
They are still not coming back to us. I'm sorry, I've been had a few domestic issues. I've not got a chance to chase them up. I will send them another email, but I think I'll try to escalate it to the board level, to their chief executive, saying this is taking them out.
Yeah.
So we could mark it up as late running then.
I couldn't possibly comment.
Councillor
Never,
Carter.
I went and read my time, my way.
Councillor Carter.
Oh yeah, the only explanation I'd give, they are amalgamating the TOCs at the moment. So we're all being amalgamated under what's called GBR.
So Great British Railway.
Yeah, so Network Rail, basically they're getting like hundreds of different operating companies and they're bringing them together, so they've got
Otherwise distracted.
a little bit, I would
Well,
suggest.
I thought they'd already amalgamated, and there was some big publicity blow that they were the first train operating company to actually be top train operating company to actually be amalgamated. I thought, but you can correct obviously because you work for them. I thought that was about a month ago they'd done that.
Southwestern, yes.
So southeastern, no, southern trains.
So, they haven't yet
No,
amalgamated.
southwest are.
Southwestern trains are,
Okay.
so, and they're doing it on a phased
Oh, okay.
process.
Okay.
But Network Rail are extremely under a lot of pressure to get this done by 27.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, the next one is with regard to the tree warden, but again, this is being, we can refer that back to the climate change item number 9, so we can move on from that. And following on from that, the mowing regime. Do you want me to just read out the green highlight here? July 2025, DVC are unable to commit to reduced mowing regime. It was suggested that STC lease a piece of land which it could manage. Discussions are ongoing.
So, yeah, I don't think the discussions are. So it's left with DDC's come back with an indicative price in terms of taking out a lease, which was only for 2 years, possibly. My personal view is I don't think it should be a priority for us, because actually the complexities around taking out a lease with local government organisation and the responsibilities that fall out of it for us as a council, we've got far bigger fish to fry, bigger deals to make.
Yes, I actually went to the climate change and nature meeting yesterday. I'm sorry, I'm just
No, carry on.
I should have got it.
No, carry on.
Yesterday at Dover District Council, and we each had a chance to say what was happening with regard to climate change and nature in our respective parishes, councils, and I raised this, and the Dover District Council, the members, the officers there were, I'd say, gobsmacked, because I sort of said, we are being asked to pay more to have them not mowed. But at least it got into the system.
That's virtually the point I was going to make in a different way. I don't see how, under any circumstances whatsoever, they can justify charging us for not mowing. That is an obscenity, and particularly with all this climate change, green space and all the rest of it. I really think they need to explain that in much more detail, and you know, not just by chat, somebody needs to come and explain why they think that's an acceptable first result.
That's the counter, and then that's
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I used to work for the same organisation, but Canterbury Council. This is a 10-year contract with contractors. These regimes are set up at the start of the contract, and it's priced accordingly. To alter that contract, we'll need not only a legal amendment to the contract, but it would also have to be agreed by the contractors. So actually to undertake a change to, and that seems really simple, to a mowing regime could be actually quite costly for Dover District Council to undertake. So, but I'm just giving you the view from the other side of the table.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that.
Yes, I found Councillor Carter's contribution very interesting as to what the hold-up is. Can I take it that the councillors at Dover were gobsmacked in your term because they didn't realise the way their own officials worked?
No, we had we had a number of local councillors. We had Sue Beer, who is deputy leader. She had, by that time she had to move on to other meetings. We had, I think it was just officers by then. So, and
So that's,
super.
the fact is, and Alan Keith was in the meeting, I believe, if I recall rightly, they have no appetite for varying the mowing.
No.
It's a given.
Yeah.
So we can't keep on asking to explain, because they explained it to us, didn't they? Which is, they're in the contract, will not save them any money, so to themselves, and it builds in complexity if they have to vary the mowing. So they said, your option as a parish council is you can lease the land from us. If you do that, you've got to take on responsibilities for insurance, cost to maintain it, and we'll only allow it probably for 2 years. And the rate that they, whilst they didn't give us a price, the rate was suggested that it wouldn't be it wouldn't be a peppercorn amount. You'd have to get the valuer involved and come up with a rate. And that was only for a very small stretch of land that is barren. It's left.
I just think it's useful that the public knows what nonsense is involved in running some local authorities, that you arrange a contract for mowing and the like, and it stays the same for 10 years, regardless of any differences, unless you want to pay money.
Having worked in central government, I can understand exactly why they've adopted that model, because you don't necessarily achieve efficiencies, but what you achieve is the lowest price possible, and then that supplier is locked into that for a long period of time. The service over the 10 years will degrade, because that's what always happens with a long-term contract. I've been in that scenario many times, but you get the cheapest price, and DDC will almost certainly have used the lowest price as their starting point. So it is how it works.
Can I just ask, because having sort of set up long-term contracts in the past, certainly on the commercial side, we might go into something for 5 years or 10 years, but we would always have been advised somewhere in that contract to say there would be a review after 5 years, if it's a review after 5 years, in case something needs to be added or removed. And actually that was and you still then would stick to the price. That's how.
What tends to happen in central government, and I assume for local government, is what they do is the price for delivery is cheap, but any time you tinker with a contract, it's excessive.
Yes.
So that's how they build in their profit from a profit-making organisation perspective. I've run and been involved in big IT contracts, and as soon as you ask somebody to pick up a phone, you might be charged £100 for someone to answer the other end of the call.
I understand that. I'm just saying that within the price, there was the options. There was always an option that was legally binding within that, without any extra charge. Because after 5 years, we could have, especially with the climate is, we could have the whole place with grass. What are they going to do with that? And also, they don't monitor what their subcontractors do anyway. So, how do they manage that? Because it's not done very well anyway. Sorry.
Anyway, how it works when we have the full local government organisation. Anyway, moving on. The invitation to Sir Roger Gale with regard to the toll bridge. I hope you don't mind the email I sent round to try and reduce the numbers of people. We had. Everybody was interested in joining on with the train that might follow him around, and it might give the wrong impression. So reducing it to a small number of us, very focused, I hope that is acceptable. You'll have seen the email that I circulated. Councillor Dan?
Well, the only concern I've got is, yes, keep it small by all means, but you haven't got anybody who's got a transport background, and that would be Dean or myself, because whatever you do, you're going to affect road traffic, unless you do nothing. And that's always an option, of course. But the two people who on this council know probably more about road transport would be Dean or myself. And I would suggest you might want to think about one of the two. So I'm not
that's a
Dean
good point.
he's perfectly adequate because he's got the practical knowledge,
Yes.
whereas mine is a bit more of the management knowledge.
Right. I have no problem there. Again, having one more person is not really
But
an issue.
leave it at that. Yeah.
Toss a coin between the two of you, or do you think?
It's better best as a 5 basis.
I look at, and this isn't Councillor Marie in terms of, as you say,
The practical.
Practical side.
I
yes.
think he would be a good choice because
Yeah.
he's got the
if he's
practical.
available. He
He
may be ruled out.
in which case.
We'll bring on with some.
Now, I was just going to say, I completely understand what Councillor Black has said. However, I think you'll find that pedestrians have to be saying what goes on over that bridge as well. And we're all going to be pedestrians. It's not just about the traffic, which it seems to be so often in this argument.
Yeah.
It's not about the
Good
traffic.
point.
Yeah, it's about pedestrians.
Yeah.
Of course, we are all pedestrians,
Yeah,
but
exactly.
we have another constituency.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
speak that.
Okay,
In that
Dean's
case,
available.
yes. We'll check. If he's available, then yes, otherwise yourself, if that's okay.
Okay, and that's the 18th.
18th and 7 p.m.
Yeah, okay. I'll speak to you.
That's the time
It's a given time.
yes. Which actually works quite well, I think, because then we'll see that at that time the traffic has declined.
Yeah.
So why can't people use it? Moving on, street furniture, and I don't know, we've got July 2025 ongoing. So
It's because there are a number of projects taken on by council members, so I think some have dragged to a halt, some are ongoing. It was just if any members had updates to their particular projects, or whether you wanted to, last meeting we were unsure about taking them off, whether they stay on there.
yeah.
So is this the final?
Yes, this is slow ways. Yeah,
I can talk about street furniture, but I'll leave it to others to talk about other things.
yeah. Well, we can take it off. If there's anything that we can add, otherwise July 2025 ongoing. Just leave it for the next meeting if anything happens. Yeah, we'll move on. And don't want to just keep going round. And we've got action for myself with regard to potential practical actions that STC can take with regard to climate change. We've got climate change at option number 9, so we will move on from that one. Unless anybody wants any particular comments
I
there.
think you might have gone back to the
I think I have. Yes, we could spend the whole meeting going on like that. Right. Okay then. I think we've done the action log. Let's on to number 6, public participation. A 20-minute session is set aside for members of the public to make representations at the meeting in respect of businesses on the agenda. Individual representation should not exceed 5 minutes. Written notice of the desire to exercise the right to speak together with the topic to be addressed must be given to the town clerk at least 4 hours in advance of the meeting. I don't see no passes there. Number 7, disability access strategy. Members to consider how access across Sandwich can be improved and to organise the details of the meeting with Sir Roger Gale. We've covered a little bit. Carol, you've usually got do you want to start it with regard to disability? So I know we don't have Claire anymore. Claire
We
deals
don't
with
have,
that.
well, we don't have Claire.
It's
I mean,
where the town team have discussed it at transport.
Yeah, well, the town team, it's on our agenda, and
Yeah.
we still had it there, Monday. The issue I think we've now got into is that it might come under the heading of a new vision for Sandwich anyway. So I think there's quite a lot of discussion, maybe nearly an hour's discussion about how the town team should be operating in the future. And yes, there will still be some issues, but maybe a separate and small group will be set up, subject to conversations with the mayor and deputy mayor, but conversations about, is it time that Sandwich actually looked at itself as a whole and decides what it's going to do in the future, how it's going to perform, what it's actually going to look like, and do we need to start making or suggesting quite large changes, which would then include access to disability.
Yeah, sorry, well, and steps on
Yeah, I mean, in the meantime, I think it is. I mean, that whole programme might take a long time. It'll have some end goals. It'll have some interim goals that we need to achieve, and it's got to have a lot more communication and buy-in from everyone, businesses, public, obviously the council. So. But in terms of the disability, I was pleased to see that, something might come from Ainsley Court. There are some things that I think should happen. I don't think we should ignore the fact that people still have issues getting to the station, for example, the railway station, where they've got to go to cross over. There might be some smaller things that can be done. I think the HIP report's got some did it have drop curbs on it? Or it might have done. But I mean, drop curbs are the other way that you can at least help people to get from one side of the road to the other. And a lot of our drop curbs don't actually marry up, or they have got car parking which is so close to them that people just ignore the fact that it's a drop curb, which is not something we can do. But yeah, I think disability access is important.
Yeah, I'd like to ask about the steps by the tennis courts and whether that can be changed.
I've raised that before, yes.
Yeah, because that I think that came up in the paperwork, didn't it?
Yeah.
And I think we should be applying to DDC to get that changed.
Yeah.
So it's not steps, it's a ramp.
Well, if it's the steps where you're heading towards the quay, tennis courts on your right, and you go up along a little bit and then down again. It's almost a barrier to keep people who are, use wheel transport out.
It is. And nowadays, what we've got to consider, it's not just people in wheelchairs, it's people in these mobility buggies as well. And if you know that area, if you go literally over the Sandown Bridge, as it is called, where the Sandown Gate was, when you get to the next part, you've got a pedestrian guard on the pavement, and then you've got to sort of get around that pedestrian guard to get onto the footpath, but then you're on the footpath to come around the back of the salutation. So you're really in the wrong place, whereas really what you want to be is you want to be by the riverside, not adjacent to the salutation. Now, though the district council have got a disability policy for the district, we should be calling on them to change those steps and make it into an accessible ramp.
Or just remove them completely.
Well, yeah, remove them completely and make it accessible. I mean, you will need a ramp because there's a difference in gradient. So from where you're coming from on Sandown Road to where you're going to, there is a difference in height. So you will need some form of ramp, but the steps need to be taken away, and we need to ask DDC to fund that and do that as quickly as possible.
Yes.
Can I just ask a question? Because where do people go if they're in a wheelchair or they're in one of those electric buggies? Where do they go when they get to the other end of of that area, because you're leading onto New Street and you can't get a wheelchair or an electric buggy down the steps there. And I understand we can't change those steps or put a ramp in because the steps are
I'm just trying
ancient
to-
monument. I mean,
Is
the
this
whole,
steps
the
on-
whole circle
Yes.
of the road and so on is hampered for people with disabilities.
Just to clarify, the steps we're talking about, are they, because there's the steps next to the tennis court,
That's the ones I'm talking about.
not
Yeah.
the ones that go up onto Mill Wall.
No,
No, but once you've crossed there, once you've crossed
Yeah.
there, if you're going to cross there, presumably to carry on walking.
Yeah.
But where are you going to go when you get to the other end?
Yes.
Oh,
Councillor Sugar?
So in terms of those steps, I had an issue that I dealt with DDC recently, because one of them was cracked for weeks. And actually, their view is, this is not their responsibility, it's actually KCC, because it's a public right of way. So even though it is adjacent to and butting on to bulwarks, it's KCC's responsibility. But on the basis of the cracked pavement, because I do speak to them regularly, they were willing to replace it because they could see that there was a need to do so. So I think the first thing is actually making sure we do know who to engage with.
Yeah.
So DDC may have responsibility, but as far as they're concerned, and I'm talking to the right people there, they see it as KCC's responsibility. Similar to the footbridge as well, that we've got all the issues about as well, about confusion about ownership and who's actually responsible, and that's why DDC and KCC are both stumping up money towards that being repaired.
Yeah. And in terms of approaching, with regard to the steps, whose responsibility will that be? Will that go through Town Park or through?
So I think that, my personal view
Yeah.
is, as a council, we are completely overstretched on responsibilities. This would be a piece of work. You can't just go and say, can you change the steps?
No.
We would need to investigate and have evidence as to why we need to do it. Because actually the argument could be, and I know it might cause more travel responsibilities, there is a access route on the opposite side of the bulwark.
Yeah.
So that would be the starting point in terms of defence of why we wouldn't do it. I would suggest.
Councillor Potter?
Yeah, I actually saw DDC putting those steps in probably about 22 years ago, something like that. So that's where I would start. And if it would help at all, and obviously with Councillor Chuka's agreement, I'm quite happy to investigate if there's not any staff to investigate. But obviously that'd have to be agreed. I don't want to step on anybody's toes in investigating.
I don't think there's any toes to step on at the moment.
Oh, right.
Because it's not happening yet. No, so
Obviously I would start off with knocking on DDC's door saying, get this sorted out, and then if they say on your bike it's KCC, I would then move up to KCC and say, is this a public right of way, and see if there's something to be done there. But both of those agencies have got disability policies, and it's their duty to make as much thoroughfares within the county disabled access.
Right.
So they've got a duty of care to disabled people to do that.
Can we sort of say yes to that? Is there any objection to that from anybody? That's a way forward. And perhaps put it as an action item.
Yeah.
So that this can be raised next 2 months' time and just see what's happening.
Yeah, sure. I can't promise anything.
Oh no.
I can't give you a timeline next week or
I
month.
think with the action of it's just so we don't forget.
Yeah, sure, yeah. But if that's the agreement of the committee, I don't want to step on anybody's toes. If anybody else wants to do it.
No. Volunteers are always welcome. And moving on to the Ainsley Court, Councillor, do you want to say or shall I?
You carry on, I'm fine, I'll just ignore it if you still have
Oh, right. Just to correct me on the names of the people.
Sure.
But we spoke to the, now he was the leader of the management or residence.
Yes, he wasn't, He was, oh God, I can't see what his name.
What was his name?
Terry,
Residence.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but he's on
Yes.
part of the hierarchy of the committee, yes.
Yeah.
He was in a position to, yay or nay say it. So.
Yeah. So we've described initially what was the proposal. That has gone forward into, from Terry, can it be a 1 in 20 drop, which would encompass 3 or 4 flagstone lengths? Very gentle drop. As far as they were concerned, just go and do it. And they sort of said, well, we can't actually just go and do it. We do need a little bit more in terms, because there might be insurance issues, that, you know, if there's almost certainly got to be a tender, you know, we've got to go out for tender of that nature, get some sort of idea of the price. Yeah, he was in agreement to all of that. As far as we understand, he is the person who can say, go ahead. So what we've agreed is that as things move forward, we will inform him, he can then inform others in Ainsley Court who are relevant, so that everybody knows what's going on, so there's nothing hidden. In the meantime, it's a case of, I have no experience of installing a ramp. As far as I'm concerned, if it's on my property, I'll just go and put a ramp in. You know, centre of Sandwich is a little bit different. So I've dropped a line through to Kerry Green, because, you know, very informally saying, who do you know who we should speak to, who will know about ramps, so that we can actually start moving forward and understand what we have to do. So that's where we are at the moment. We're just waiting for Kerry to come back. Councillor Bennington?
Yeah, thank you. You said if it was at your place, you just get it done. And, I mean, we did. We put an extra dropped curb in on our drive, and it was really not expensive at all.
No.
But obviously, if there are corporate complications,
I don't think it's so much that it's visible for, let's say, a couple of days. It will be the workmen working there, and people will see what's going on, and there might be somebody who will raise this as an issue, saying, well, what are you doing? Do you have this, is it insured? Are we going to do a slip? And then if somebody, you know, engineers a slip, where do we stand? So it's just to make sure everything is absolutely correct. Councillor Carter?
Oh yeah, just have one question. I noticed that the funds come, because there's a budget for this, it has been for about 3 years.
Yes.
I've noticed the funds can't be transferred to the private management company for Ainsley Court to undertake the work. So would we be covering ourselves, because if we have the ramp bill and we pay for the ramp, is it therefore then Sandwich Town Council's ramp, or are we giving ownership of the ramp to Ainsley Court through some legal process?
Hopefully pass the ownership on to them.
Okay.
But this is where informal discussions with DDC,
Yeah.
who just
But I think that's quite an important matter,
Yeah.
that we do need to make sure, because at the end of the day, if somebody does have a slip or trip, we don't want them coming back to us saying, well, you built it, so therefore the claim is your claim.
Yeah, and if
That's
if we sort of do a nighttime flit there and just sort of put one in, which I've spoken about it now, so we're on the
Oh, you're on camera.
We're on camera. Any?
I think it's fantastic news.
Yeah,
It's
sooner the better.
yes, slowly.
So the sooner the better.
Yeah.
Can I just mention
Yes.
that gentleman's name is Terence Dorber.
Door.
Yes, I heard this.
Anything else anybody wants to comment on with regard to disability access strategy? We move on from there. Tourism. Verbal update from the Tourism Forum.
I've got two other members of the Tourism Forum here, so you'll correct me please if I'm wrong on any point.
Certainly
Right, the dusters out. Chloe, can I just ask, do you get copies of the town team minutes? Because they were surprised that these weren't being distributed anywhere. Because you think the clerk does?
The clerk gets a copy of
Oh,
it.
the clerk, okay, I haven't, so personally I don't get them directly.
Right.
Um,
Is it possible to find out what happens to them? Because the town team certainly felt that it might be some value, certainly to this group, if not the whole council. If you could have a look at that, please. Right, we had a long discussion about the website. And I explained to them that obviously it's going to take us a while to recruit a new town clerk and for someone else to get their feet under the table. I may have misled them, but I said that I don't think we're going to get a lot of attention on the tourism aspects of the website for quite a long time in those circumstances. And if others want to correct me, please do so. So we then said, well, a lot of people were concerned that council websites for tourism usually are a little bit slow and bureaucratic. So there was a long discussion about should we, somehow in the forum, at least get a project to see what we want on a website, scope it out, and then see what some costs might be before we came back. Because we could probably have something a bit more zingy, and because it doesn't need to be the official Sandwich Town Council, the language can be a little bit different. You can have a slightly different approach because I don't need to build in all the cautions. The second thing that came up was that, in fact, you two went to Dover to the cruise terminal.
oh, yeah.
I understand that was an extremely useful meeting. A couple of things came out of that we want the manager of the tour operator who operates various tours on behalf of the cruise ships to come for a tour around Sandwich, and Richard Roth from the south, perhaps another, will do the same thing as we did for Peter Wright, who is the port manager, the port cruise manager. You see, he was quite surprised at how much there is.
Yeah, she didn't seem to know that. She organises all the coaches that pick all these tours up, so it can be from any line, you know, any sea line. So she said at the moment I think they do an hour at Walmart and maybe an hour here, if anyone is interested in that particular tour. And what we were saying is that there's a lot more to see in Sandwich than an hour. And she was very keen then, wasn't she, to come and say, well look, it's really important if we can get in quickly, because they're already producing their list for the line, you know, the lines for 2027, 2028. So if we can bring her in and show her, as did before, what Sandwich has to offer, then she would be more than happy to expand that tour and bring people here for longer. So, you know, at the moment they go to Rye more often than they get stuck on the traffic and then coming back. And I think it's well worth it. What we need is for people to spend a little bit of free time here so that our shops and our hostelries can actually gain from it, yes, and benefit. So we wanted to bring her and do that at ASAP.
The other thing is that once people have cleared immigration, there is a large desk that Dover District, as White Cliffs run, and to explore the possibility of having one of these banners, you know, that's floor-mounted, as you raise them up to a collar-sized sandwich. And that's something that they want to have a look at, and obviously then we'll have to see what costs might be and who will be paying for that. But because at the moment, the only thing they've got there are the brochures, and we're going to talk about that later anyway. But that would be much more eye-catching, and I think you said that no other tourist destination has anything there, so we might be able to steal a march on some of the others.
It would be quite there is a counter in each of the terminals, and it is purely there for people who have not pre-booked their ones with their own shipping company. And actually, while we were there, we saw quite a few people coming along and stopping, And then, but of course, there are lots of brochures from people. Yes, they did have ours, which was really good, but something that they could pull up, that had all the pictures and the things that they could do in some would really be very eye-catching. And I think Peter agreed that they agreed that they would have one in each of the terminals if we would supply them, and they make sure that people that sort of use and see them. So.
Okay, so, thank you. Next thing we talked about the video that Terry Palmer and I've forgotten Julie Ellis produced. There's 2 videos now. 3-minute long video has been launched, and I'll circulate the Facebook link for that to all councillors. It is, in my view, damn good. It really is first rate. So those of you who haven't seen it, please look at it. It's been very well received at the NEC in the National Tourism conference they had there. There is now a 9-minute video in final production, and that I think will illustrate a lot more about Sandwich and the surrounding attractions, because the message is it's not just a historic town. There's a lot more to this place, and we've got to attract a much wider range of audiences. And that, if it's to the standard of the 3-minute one, I think it'll be extremely good. But we haven't seen it yet. That is a final plan. We talked about the brochure. The brochure in 2022, 40,000 brochures were printed at a cost of about £12,000. We did talk about that. We suggest that we want to do something like that. We have to do a quick short-term fix and see the cost of perhaps printing maybe 3,000–4,000 brochures. Max, just to tide us over, because the brochure is getting a little bit dated. It's got a lot of information which is not about Sandwich, and we might be able to get something that's a lot tighter and cheaper, because it won't have so many pages in it. But we need a small group to do that, and Lynn and I talked about that earlier when outside. We wondered if we could set up perhaps 4 people, 2 from the forum and perhaps Councillor Ripley and myself, to really scope something out and then get some costs. It doesn't need to be the great expensive one that we've got at the moment. And then we come back to the council and say, what can we do? The view of the meeting was asking the businesses to pay for it, or even a portion of it, was unlikely to be very successful.
So what I'd say from a council perspective, this year's budget does not include an allocation for a brochure, but there will be time needed to refresh it. So there is an additional cost in terms of actually working, unless you go to a new provider that might be more economically viable.
We would look at it, we'd explore printers, yes.
So like the Folk and Ale leaflet, very good, and their costs may go up. Certainly in terms of having spoken to one of the committee, they were going to make profit on selling them at £3 each, whereas the cost previously, when I did a quick mathematical exercise, it came out at £3 for the production. So I think there's definitely an economy in there.
Well, there is scope, and we can learn from them as well. Thanks for the point about Folk and Ale, what they did as well. Okay.
Because we said even the stuff that we get printed for Sandwich and Blue, it's really cheap. It's not the quality that you're looking at, but it's really cheap, and that's just a printer and deal that don't sort those two. So I'm sure that shopping around is, but I think the most important thing was to actually get it sorted so that it was about Sandwich. Take out all the other stuff, and it's on very high quality paper at the moment, isn't it?
Just to mention briefly that currently we have just under 4 boxes of leaflets. That's all we have to last us through the whole summer. So whatever we do, we need to do it ASAP. If we want to encourage tourism, it's a given.
Absolutely.
We need to do that.
Councillor Pennington?
Yes, thank you. I just wondered on the website, what other websites are there? Is it Visit Kent? Has a Sandwich?
There are the trouble with Sandwiches, there's a whole number of websites. most of which are pretty narrowly focused. Many of them are out of date, and we think that it would be much better to have something that people could buy into, be it Compass, be it all some of the others, and we might be able to get some sponsorship from companies. But at the moment, there's so many competing groups and competing individuals. We have to address that and either get them to realise that one is much better, or still do something far better and make sure that by whatever means we have in impressing the algorithm, that our brochure, our website comes top. So there is work to be done there.
Councillor Carter and then Councillor.
Yeah, follows on from what Councillor Black was just saying. When I did the tourism brochure many, many years ago, probably 10, 12 years ago, we got sponsorship to pay for the brochure, so the town council didn't have to pay for it. Some of it came from the Chamber of Commerce, which I don't know if that's still around, but there's £3,000 sitting in the Chamber of Commerce coffers that could be put towards that. But we also got sponsorship from a couple of the organisations in the town, so it was almost cost neutral. And I would suggest that's the way to go after what Councillor Duke said, if there's no budget.
Councillor Duke,
Yeah. So I think,
then me.
yeah, so the cost, that's something to look at in due course once you've got it scoped out, as you said. But back to the website, there is a plethora of websites in different shapes and forms advertising Sandwich, so another website type may not do anything other than be another website, so there is a challenge there. If you look at Sandwich is open, and it's not one that I use often. It would cover all of the ground that you're probably wanting to focus on.
Well, there's always do a deal with them. That's another possibility. We wouldn't rule that out.
We had a look at the historic costs for the brochures, and it didn't look as though the Chamber of Commerce may have originally had said they were putting money in, but I don't think your accounts show that actually any money came from anywhere else other than from the town council. So it's a bit, whether or not that was because there was another print run and no one got any money the second time, we don't know. But certainly looking at that cost, it all looked as though it came from the town council.
That's right.
Well, the town, because I asked a question when Councillor Black asked about it, and the answer I got back from the town clerk, it was actually funded jointly, I don't know percentage-wise, but it was the council and the Chamber of Commerce.
Yeah, and we can't see
Well,
that in the accounts.
we can't find that.
No.
That is correct though, what Councillor Duke was saying.
Yeah, as an example, with the Sandwich Civics, we did the 16A5 sides, 2,500 copies, about £250. So you can get it full colour.
Okay, may I ask, can you ask the town clerk if she can actually find some evidence that it was paid for, because we can't find any. And on the note that was sent to me, there is no mention of it. So clearly we've got a difference of opinion.
Yeah. If the Tourism Forum is independent from the council, is it of the nature that it can go to the Magics Trust?
I wouldn't have thought it was Maddox, but it might be STBF at some stage.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you're saying no, but
It would have to be a charitable concern to be able to access either STBF or Maddox. So I can't. I think that's
the difficulty then is if STC is not going to put any money into it, it ain't going to happen. Full stop. And it's
So that
as
wasn't-
blunt as that.
and that wasn't the answer that I gave. What I said was that currently there is no provision.
No, I
in the budget
know
for
that.
it. So what has to happen is you need to scope out a
Which is
proposal with a
what we
cost,
said we do. Yeah.
and then we'll have to discuss it as 16 councillors, and take something for something, as a consequence for elsewhere.
But we are going to need, if we want to approach, we're going to have some funding from the council. How much of it is great businesses? Because the view of the forum, to me, was very clearly snowball chance of hell at the moment.
That's a bit interesting. It's interesting as a position. But there you go.
Can I just say that if we don't get the tourist guides, there's going to be a big gap in information around the town, all around the town, because they go to rate of knots. I mean, I'm constantly, taking them around and delivering them places. And it doesn't look very good for the town council if we're not promoting tourism in this way. I think we're cutting our own throats in a way.
Yeah, I totally agree there. That we need to project it, and as far as the businesses are concerned, the festival brought people into the town. But if you go into the shops, they've already got sales going on because their businesses they're not ticking over in the level that they want them to, and that they should do. So I think going to them and saying, would you like to contribute? And we're talking about sites, aren't we? We're getting people around Sandwich, where the buildings are, the sites are. We're not saying here's Sandwiches, it's a fabulous dress shop down there. So sort of asking them to contribute would be a bit difficult. And I agree with what Councillor Ripley's saying. If you've got a tourism forum, and actually that forum is full and is coming up with lots and lots of ideas that can move the town forward and bring in more people, which is what we want. So we have to find a way of investing something that comes from the town council.
Yeah, so you really need to direct your sponsorship to the organisations that have got the money. So, for instance, the meeting room showed a turnover of £440,000 last year. So they're not really struggling, are they?
Meeting room.
Waiting room.
The waiting room.
Waiting room, is it?
The
Sorry.
waiting room, yeah.
The waiting room.
Yeah.
So
we're not saying they wouldn't, but we're not.
yeah.
We're not. You've picked one really good spot though there. I mean,
Well,
but
that's who I would go to. That's who I'd go to, and I'd definitely go to either Mr. Graham or Mr. Friend and ask them, because they're sitting on public money
yeah, they are.
that is Chamber of Commerce money, which belongs to the businesses in the town, and that money needs to be used to promote the businesses in the town. We don't want it sitting in a bank getting 0.01% interest.
There is a big issue. We could go on, but I think there is an issue there getting that.
Councillor Pennington?
Yeah, I mean two things. Firstly, I still think it's worth a try asking for businesses in the town to contribute. Secondly, I don't know if organisations like Visit Kent would support something like that. I don't know if they're sitting on money. Very often you find pockets of money that people just aren't applying for.
Right, if we can, is there anything on the tourism forum moving on?
Two things very quickly. The investigations continue on could we get an elephant on the green, and I think you folks are a bit more qualified to talk about that.
It's moving ahead. We've been to DDC. The tourist people, people who run tourism there are very, very keen to have it. We've spoken with the conservation officer, who's given us a list of the things that would need to happen to get one onto the quay, or anywhere, in fact, in Sandwich, but particularly we wanted it near the medieval centre. So we need to start writing that up, and because there's a statement that has to be written, we've got to find out how much it would cost to rent the land, and so on and so forth, and not cut the grass around the elephant's feet. So there's quite a lot there that's still
No. Well, elephants eat grass.
Make sure he spreads his legs.
Rephrase that. The one point that came out that I was listening to was also that it will only really take off if there was a very clear endorsement from Sandwich Town Council. Now, with the details have to be worked out for that, no one's suggesting you being asked by a pig in a poke, but it will need a very clear endorsement from the council once it's seen the proposals, because that's one of the things that Dover would be looking for, or White Cliffs would be looking for. So we need to be clear now.
Sorry, what do you mean by an endorsement? Do you mean a financial commitment?
No, I said endorsement.
Yeah, it's very different. So that's
I am.
yes, yeah, that's good.
And the final thing is the tourism forum, a couple of the tourism forum are looking at the possibility of bringing a Thames barge, an unmanned Thames barge, and possibly mooring it at the quay. Highbury Marine are supportive of that. It's very early days. It would not contradict what the Heritage Harbour Trust are trying to do, to bring another Thames barge up, but that Thames barge would link with the schools to have it crewed by people from the schools, and the second one would not have an engine at all. This one probably does have an engine. So is there some way to develop this as a focal point, should we say, for the quay? There's a whole lot of discussion, so we're not sure how much the Harbour Board have been involved in this. I can contact them. And also there's the issue about how much DDC would want to charge, because at the moment they get zippo zilch because nobody's mooring there. So, but if they try to overcharge, they're not going to get anything. So it's a delicate balance. But it is very early days for that.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a thought. When boats are there, ships are there, everyone just wanders around, they look at it, becomes a focal point. And these were barges that we used, and apparently they do very well in Faversham.
Yes.
So I think the idea was to put one there. We didn't understand right at the beginning that I think Nicholas Gray's group were looking at it as well. But that is slightly different, and this would certainly, I believe, a little bit more in keeping than the E22 used to be. But even that did have a lot of people who went there specifically to look at it. If this was static, with its lovely big red sail and so on, I think it would. Anyway, we're going to come back with a paper on proposal.
We've got to make progress, so a lot of stuff still in progress, yeah.
Right, if we can move on from tourism, unless there's anything pressing from anybody. Okay, item number 9, climate change. Members can discuss and identify opportunities to tackle climate change both within the town council and in Sandwich. Would anybody like to start off with any comments?
I just wanted to check on the emergency plan. Where is that?
That's the resilience.
That's the next one. Yeah, sorry, I've got my comments on the comments at the end. So, so the first thing I was going to say, we do need to develop a climate action strategy because it's in our business plan for the next 2 years. So there's our hook and reference point. I sort of identified some improvements that we could consider, but one or two local councils not very far from here have got a very active and clear articulation of how to respond to in terms of climate action, and I think we shouldn't reinvent the wheel ourselves. We should look at what's being done already, but it does feel like it's a bit of a project. So the things that we can do are like reviewing our working practices within the council. So are there areas in which we can take account of the environmental impact? We need to work towards whether we've made sure that we've got a carbon neutral energy supplier. I'm not sure if we have. I know we entered into some new agreements that was financially attractive, but I don't know if it's a carbon neutral supplier, so that's something we can check. We could audit our travel costs and methods. We could take steps to make sure the Guildhall it's more energy efficient, and the property manager is already doing that. So in essence, I think there are a number of things we've already started. There's a number of things we've already done, and we should be capturing that in terms of our response to this business plan activity. Question is, who's going to do it? It's this committee, but it'll need a couple of people working on and probably looking at one or two to other councils, and I would point towards Deal Council as
Yes.
a really good example of how they've responded to the climate crisis and how, and the things that you do aren't necessarily massively challenging.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this going on from there with the deal in Walmer, certainly Walmer has the infrared camera. Dover District Council at the moment looking at purchasing one which would be available for use from local councils. So we would be able to use the Dover District Council camera. They're also looking at the availability of climate change boxes, basically making your home warmer, little things that can be given to people, whether it's a strip that goes at the bottom of doors to stop drafts, and very nicely they are purchasing through carpenters. So they're actually buying them locally, and this is some thousands of pounds worth going through our local hardware store. So I think one of the things obviously is infrared camera, having a person responsible for that. Right?
Sorry, you have to forgive my ignorance. What are the infrared cameras?
Infrared camera, basically only really relevant during the winter months when people have their heating switched on. You point the camera at their house, and where it's losing heat, it has a different colour to where it's not losing heat. So you can identify the windows. The windows will be a bright yellow or white almost, whereas the walls might be a sort of blue. So the walls are cold, but the windows are hot, which means you're losing heat through the windows. So you can say to the homeowner, do you have double glazing? Maybe there's a problem with the double glazing if you've got it. Or maybe you live in the North Sandwich. Or maybe you need thicker curtains or secondary glazing. But it identifies for the homeowner where they're losing heat, potentially through the roof. If the roof is warm, when previously you could tell that from if the snow melted. Now we don't get snow, so you can't tell.
That leads neatly, in fact, to the discussion about conservation areas and double glazing. It's been a long-standing issue. Has it been clarified whether old or listed buildings within conservation areas can have appropriately designed wooden double glazing in Sandwich?
Councillor Thornton?
Yeah, we had a lady from DDC, the conservation officer, did say about that, and she said that they would consider each case on its merit. So I think it's dependent on where the property is, what the age of the property is, different aspects like that. But she said it's certainly not a total no to make improvements to properties, even listed properties in conservation areas, but it has to be done on a case-by-case basis. So somebody has to put in the improvements they want to do, and possibly if the double glazing is going to be in similar like-for-like wooden casements, then the conservation officer would possibly agree that double glazing could go ahead. So that wasn't a slight improvement on what we need to do. But that's what I was going to say, Mr. Chair, if that's okay. We really should be, Sandwich North Ward is really sort of properties that are quite old properties and quite a lot are listed. And that, I think, is where we should really be trying to put our efforts to help those. The ones in the Sandwich South Ward have all been built since the 1950s, 60s at the oldest, and so apart from one or two.
There's 3 on Dover Road, and there's others dotted around Southport.
I was
think we're
being
talking
in the
generally.
round. I was not being specific to individual properties. So,
No.
but in the rounds, Sammy Shank Ward, the majorities, the estate, as it's called, was put in the 1960s, and several of my house is 1961. So a lot of the properties already have secondary double glazing. What we should be doing is this council should be helping those people who live in the North Ward to assist them with trying to bring their properties. And myself and my wife know a number of friends that we know in the town, residents that we know, who are quite elderly, and they have very old properties that have not been refurbished or updated. I'm talking decades. So we should be helping the elderly of the town who live in the North Ward to try and make their properties better.
Councillor Pennington?
I do know one or two people who've been doing up houses. I know of one on Fisher Street whose experience and knowledge might actually be quite useful in providing us with advice on that, because they have been quite careful about the renovation and will probably have explored what is possible and what isn't possible.
Yes.
I hear what the conservation officer has said. However, to date, I haven't found a single person who has applied for proper glazing within their houses in this ward that's ever had it through. And I have personal experience with a mock-up of exactly what it would look like, and you couldn't tell from outside to inside. And I think our council, our Dover District Council, are particularly harsh. I mean, we know that even people who wanted the roofs repaired and so on, they have to wait for years to find the right person to do it anyway, because it has to be a sort of heritage builder. I think we are a little bit out of step with other boroughs and other counties, where they are open-minded, and when they come through, I think we had this discussion some while ago at the town team meeting, and one of the members actually sort of listed quite a few of the counties where they were open to proper double glazing. It has to fit, it has to be an hardwood. You can't you might be tripling your pane, not actually having a whole one. But I think, and the other thing that came up was we will never in here have heat pumps. I mean, we've hardly got any foundations, never know anything else. And also the electric car scheme. People are buying them, but they can't use their own properties because they've got to come across a pavement, and that's not legal. And it's a real problem. So if Dover, they're really serious about climate change and what we can do, we've got to find out what their policy is going to be moving forward to help with this. Because when you put an application in, how long does that take to get that application through, and to be at the end of it to be told, well, no, you're in a conservation area.
Yeah, yes.
I think there needs to be a bit of discussion about it.
I'm not sure who was first.
No, I've heard from a number of other sources that Dover is particularly conservative, because I've had to do minor things, that they are very good. The difficulty we've got, being realistic, is that with local government reorganisation coming into place, coming down the track, the chances I suggest of them making radical changes to the way they approach conservation is unlikely. What happens when it's emerged, whichever combination it is, but I think we're now getting into a planning blight situation because of all of these changes that will come down the track. And I think we'll find a lot of things in Dover start to grind to a halt, because they don't know what on earth is going to happen if they've even got any jobs going for themselves, and that does concentrate the mind, unfortunately. And other councils are going to have similar issues. But
Councillor Shaker?
Yeah, if we go back to the agenda item description. So what it is, members to discuss and identify opportunities to tackle climate change both within the town council and Sandwich. Then we've got, and as I mentioned earlier, we've got the reference point as a business plan. And that identifies a number of steps that are owned by this committee that it should tackle. And the best place to start, rather than what's happening now, is focusing on conservation and house improvements. That is only one element, and we'll end up running in that direction, and we might run in another direction. What we should be doing, capacity willing, is developing a town council climate change strategy, which articulates what it is we're going to do both within-ward looking and outward-looking. And some of that's about stakeholder engagement with DBCs being mentioned, things that we can do ourselves in the council, but also information we can share. So addressing the climate change challenge isn't about us doing hundreds of different things necessarily, it's sometimes about informing others to think about what options are available. So we need a strategy, and as I said earlier, there's already stuff out there. Deal Town is a really good example where actually that would inform how we might go as a committee, but somebody's got to be, or people got to be willing to spend time on it. Or else what we'll do is, we'll talk about windows and double glazing, and we won't go, third and fourth.
So, we need an action from this. That being, can I suggest one, two, possibly three people on the committee holding their hands up, and I'll put my hand up. Are you putting your hand up to agree?
Yes.
Good. If we can
I mean, I would love to, but
Yeah.
we don't have capacity in the next few
Yes,
years.
I would struggle, but
Yeah.
somebody has to. So if we can meet up at some point.
Yeah.
Chairman, you've got
Oh,
Martin.
Councillor
Fantastic.
Yes, so it's three of us.
And I recommend looking at the Deal Town
Yeah.
website, and it's a drop down, and it's got lots of stuff in there, so
Yeah.
you not plagiarise necessarily, but it's really good, helpful to you.
Well, we could look at Faversham and then it's research, not plagiarism.
Yes. Well, I'm sure we can plagiarise. between
I can probably take advice from somebody else.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes. There's always somebody's always been there first. So as an outcome, the three of us will meet up at some point.
Yeah.
We've got shared emails, email addresses, and
And one simple step, which is on the business plan, is actually we revise our reports that go to any meeting, which includes a question about, is what you're asking for, does it have an impact on climate change? It's a simple step, not big, it can go into the standard format, and then whoever's submitting a report has to answer that question. And many things won't have a climate change impact, but at least it's a step that we're taking easily.
so that's an outcome from this. Is there anything else immediately on climate change that
It's getting warmer.
Can I just ask, you've got, I know it's council responsibility, but there are people in the town that are really good at this sort of thing, they've got the expertise. Is there no way that you could find and second someone else on to help you?
I think initially it's got to be,
Okay.
we're coming up with how we're going to approach, and that could include creating a Sandwich Climate Change Committee, or something of that nature, like the Tourism Forum, Climate Change Forum. But I think we have to sort of actually talk about that outside, and possibly have it as an action point to report back in 2 months' time.
And that's a positive step, is include in your activity, because actually doing that is something we're not currently doing.
Right, if we can move on from climate change, unless there's anything pressing on that. To number 10, the Sandwich Resilience and Emergency Plan. Members to discuss the resilience emergency plan for Sandwich. That's what
Can I just ask, without going into the discussion of the plan itself, that some semantics and that are rectified. On page 3, third paragraph down, it's got a part that goes, I don't know if it's just my one, it says this plan is based on the developed by Kent County Council. So there's a word or something missing there. As I say, third paragraph down, it doesn't make sense. I don't know if you've got that. On page 3.
Page 3, whereabouts was
It says on the third paragraph down, it says, towards the end of that paragraph, it says this plan is based on the
plan, I would imagine.
Yeah, can we have that put in?
Yeah.
Put in there, so if that's okay. On page 4, if we, I don't know if we're amending these things, it's obviously quite old, this, I think. It says on the, second, third, fourth, fifth, 6th paragraph, helping vulnerable people, the last sentence says, Sandwich has care homes within the town and residents may become vulnerable. I don't think we have any.
Okay, I think the idea is this is the starting point.
Yeah.
We'll have
I'm
to,
just saying, could
yeah.
these be amended? And then the last thing was in this document, it's on the top of the page 5. In the rest of the document, it refers to Sandwich Town Council, and the very first paragraph says, in this case, please contact Sandwich Parish Council.
Yeah.
So, before we sort of update this, could those be rectified if possible?
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Tudor?
I've got a broader question about what is this? So it's not on our website. So if it's an emergency, nobody knows it exists. How do we access it? How does it link into the Kent and Medway Resilience Forum, who have the responsibilities if there is an emergency? We don't have statutory responsibilities. So I'd hate that we just do a tick box exercise and try and bring everything correctly up to date in terms of names and stuff, and actually missing the whole point about how do we as a parish council interlink to those that will actually manage an emergency. Obviously an emergency could start here, but we would have to and would be responsible for making contact with the right authorities who do have the responsibility. So I'm just a bit concerned about why is it suddenly appeared?
Yeah.
Was it found in a drawer and needed to be taken down? I'm not
I
sure.
don't know where this has come from either. Looking at
At
it.
the last meeting, you asked if we had one,
Ah.
and when I spoke to the clerk, she said that
Here it
here
is.
it is.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, so this could have been many centuries ago. Councillor Ripley?
Just the one thing that concerns me about this sort of thing is that if you're in an emergency, you have to scroll through all of this so you find the right piece of paper. People are dropping down dead all round by the time you get to the right paragraph, you know. So I think you either have to condense what you put into obvious action points, or there's not really intended.
Well, I've been to a couple of the resilience meetings. I think we have actually as well, and I sit through them, and we have the Environment Agency, we have police talking, ambulance service, various services, and in each case, I can imagine that depending on the emergency, and obviously, emergency essentially means it's happening like in the next 5 minutes. It's anything, you know, it's immediate. It's not planned. And if we're having a resilience or an emergency plan, it has to be something that prepares people so that we are not involved. Because my impression is the police, the Environment Agency will say, can you go home? Can you go away? Just let us get on with it. They might want information like where people live and who is vulnerable. That would help. But it has to be things that are done, dusted, so that we're able to say, here's information, here's not a plan.
So, I think that the emergency services will very rapidly take over if it's a very serious incident. There's no doubt about that. What we could contribute more is, okay, this is what we have available. We have, for example, we have a fully equipped kitchen in here. Could this be used as a temporary feeding centre, for example? Could we use this building at all for things like temporary accommodation? That's much more, I think, of what we could contribute, rather than constantly updating this, because phone numbers change, people change, and I've done for very large institutions, and even an institution that is continuing to operate all the time. It's the devil's own job trying to keep it up to date. But if you've got some key information of the kind of things that would be useful to someone who manages it, I need to move 40 people now. Where can I put them for the next 3 hours? I've got this. Okay, can you do something quickly to get to feed them and house them? That may not be overnight. We may just say, well, we can temporarily simplify it, or provide some shelter, or we can provide some communications in the form of, do we have access to a system or a good network? That's the kind of thing I think that's probably of more use than trying to replicate what I think is the legal responsibility of districts and councils, and counties.
And that's the point, and that's been brigaded into the Kent and Medway Resilience Forum, and I'm just looking at their website now. We should not be trying to answer all of these exam questions when there is a existing structure in place. What they would be looking, I suppose, from a forum perspective is who are the key contacts in your town? How do you engage with them? There's that sort of thing. So and picking up on Councillor Ripley's point, I don't think we necessarily need a 20-page document. We need the key things, and maybe on our website, of course, an emergency might take down the whole systems, but on our website, if there is an emergency, this is what you need to do. And it might be just a signposting, for example, to the Resilience Forum, for example. But somebody needs, again, another piece of work to investigate with the forum how a parish council delivers its role in a much bigger and statutory responsible way. The others have responsibility for.
Councillor Pennington.
Thank you. Yes, I fully agree that one shouldn't reinvent the wheel, and there are already forum that have strategies for this. Just a couple of things. One is no two emergencies are the same, and you cannot very often predict an emergency in terms of what it will require as a response. I know when COVID started we were in Westgate, and we were praised by Thanet District Council because one of our first reactions was to contact the chemists and ask if they could give us a list of vulnerable people who would need support. And we put together teams of volunteers. I mean, that was tailored to that situation, but it might be completely inappropriate in another one. You have to think about cyber attacks and all this kind of thing. I mean, it really needs treating at a higher level, but I think we have to be prepared to react very quickly, because I think local responses will be very important.
Sorry, some years ago, and it may have been 8 or 10, there was a councillor here who wrote the emergency plan for Sandwich. It was not this document, I'm sure it wasn't. I think it was a very short document. She used a fire officer to help to put some of this together. I was in the council chamber when this was presented, and I don't remember any of this sort of thing. It was purely about sort of what you're describing now, about the where to go to get things, and perhaps identifying. I'm sure there was a list where it said identify all the elderly or disabled people. There were options for, depending on what the emergency was and where you had to evacuate people to. So the technical college was a place that, because it was outside of Sandwich, if it was something that happened, like a fire on where we would go. But they were just examples of places that we could have identified. So as you said, we could have passed that list on. That list would be there for the emergency services. And I mean, if you go back to, was it 2000 and I can't remember the date when there was a flood here, actually Sandwich Town Council really didn't do anything at that point. It came from the Environment Agency.
I understand they basically put the flood back.
Correct. I mean, so I agree with you, but I'm sure it was not this document. It was much smaller, and I think there will probably be a list of emergency services on the back. But things like, does the toll bridge, does the bell tower ring when there's an emergency in the town? Is there a special sound that you have to alert people that this is a problem?
Ringing my siren.
Yeah, I know, yes, exactly. I mean, that's what I remember.
Yes, so I do know the lady that Carol George is talking about. I could ask her if she's still got that document if you wanted.
I think that would be very useful.
If that would be helpful. So the second thing I was going to say, you're not correct about Sandwich Town Council didn't do anything, because when I was coming back from work I had a phone call and all the councillors were all actually called up, and we were all asked to go down to the quayside where there was big piles of sand, and there was quite a number of councillors, including myself and my wife, who were filling sandbags. And then we had other people similar to Councillor Mallet here, who had military type vehicles that were coming and picking the sandbags up and taking them to properties that were doing.
Not the experience that we had, where we had to go to Gaze and Salts, fill our own sandbags and borrow the co-op trolleys in order to bring them back. And it was the Environment Agency that told my family where to go and what to do, and at that time, what time the tide was. But I mean, all right, I didn't see that at all. But all I'm saying is that perhaps one part of the town had it, but certainly End Stratford didn't have that.
Can I suggest one of the things that we're talking generically about
Yeah.
emergency?
Yes.
It would be useful to actually have almost a list of what constitutes. I mean, for example, the little lad that was in the Stour that died, would that be Toby? Would that be considered something that should be within, not necessarily resilience, but how we deal with emergency? Because that was an emergency, and it was either handled well or badly, but it was turned into a circus. Very sadly, and whether planning for that sort of thing, we can avoid that and deal with it far better and possibly safer. But where an emergency starts, what kind of emergencies Sandwich might have? Obviously flooding. Whether from the Stour, I mean, I'm thinking of the very recently in America that.
Oh, yes, Texas, yeah.
We're at the end of the Stour, so the rainstorms recently were 2 inches, very isolated, and you suffered the immediate effects. If it was across all of Kent, we would be underwater because it would come straight down the Stour in a flood. So, that's the council of that.
I think if you perhaps concentrate on 4 or 5 things that are major. I know this sounds terrible, but one individual being knocked down by a car or unfortunately falling in the river, I don't think that would be covered by any of these. This would be individual fire and rescue services or ambulance service or police. I suspect this is much more for where we've got a whole group of people that you're going to require resources to do things. So you could probably identify maybe 5 or 6 things, which is what we did at the university one. What were the major risks? Okay, if this particular building went on fire because of all the kinds of chemicals in it, because it was the chemistry teaching facility, that would be a big problem. Whereas the building next to it went on fire, to be honest, it really wasn't going to be a danger to the city of Glasgow, because it was very much of the business school, and that was a different kettle of fish. So you could perhaps identify maybe 4 or 5 things. Would there be a major fire, a flood, some other natural disaster which could occur? You could even have things like, although it's very rare, but the one people talk about is an aircraft crashing. It's extremely rare, and we're not on major flight paths, but something could happen like that. So you've identified 5 or 6 and say, what would you do in those circumstances? And that gives you just a very rough outline. We need to know this, this and this, and have that up to date. And that's the way that we did it at Glasgow University, was to say, okay, what would happen here? Have we got anything? Have we got any radioactive substances? Have we got this, that, and so on? So you honed in very closely on what was a significant risk that the emergency services would need assistance with. And also we said for accommodation, if there's a major problem in a part of Glasgow, we have all the student accommodation at certain times of the year. Could we use that and hand that over very quickly to them? That's the kind of thing I think that might be more valuable. But it's where you draw that line is obviously one person dying in a river is a tragedy. There's absolutely no question about that. Is it an emergency for these purposes? I don't think so.
Terrorist attack, sorry, thinking like that.
Well, we do have this frequent problem down at
Yeah, that's what I thought.
the park with the Israeli Arms Company.
Councillor Pennington?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a consensus here that we need a very short document, it needs regular updating, and that it needs to be linked in with structure within Kent or whatever replaces it. But I think to look at the earlier document, and something which is very operational.
In the absence of that, can I suggest a straw man document, just something that we can then come back and tear apart? That, I don't know if anybody wants to volunteer.
Not volunteering. I was just going to put a proposal forward, because we're all going round and round with our own opinions. I think this should be taken to full council and flagged up for the actions that we propose from this committee, which is trying to get hold of the smaller document, but in the absence of a small document, having something drafted on similar lines to what the small document was. But I think it ought to be flagged up to the full council, because then the full council, we could find a willing volunteer to take it on possibly.
But if we can actually have something that is of a nature that we can say this is a starting point.
Indeed.
I don't see this as a starting point. This is
Finishing.
not even a finishing point. It's lots of words.
Sorry, you said earlier that some of the other councils have got other documentations already done. Do we know whether perhaps Deal has got
He just all he needs to put in his parish council emergency
Yes.
plan. I'm looking at one here from Normanton. Yeah, there's lots of examples, but whoever does this, I think needs to also take account of the resilience forum, because whatever we do at a parish council level has to be within that framework. We can't be UDI.
No.
So there's a little bit of intelligence wrapped around this in terms of just structuring documents.
Councillor Matt?
Should we just ask the Resilience Forum, what would you want? And keep it as simple as that. If this is what you want, you're the professionals in this, because they have professionals on that. Give us the list of 5, 10, 15 items, whatever they are, that you want, and just do it that way.
Yeah.
And that means that they will know exactly what kind of information they would require. And I'll go straight to them and ask them first, and then take it further.
Councillor Carter?
Oh yeah, sorry to say this document here was drawn up in consultation with the Resilience Forum. I remember it being drawn up because Laura was the town clerk.
But that's not, she did have a much smaller document, didn't she?
The previous lady did, yeah, sure. I don't know if she'd still have it, but it's worth asking, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a very bureaucratic document there, not really. Well, I don't mind just drawing up, as I said, a straw man document, something that can be circulated amongst us first. Yeah. And happy to have comments, critical, supportive. So I won't have any sensitivities over it. And then, as Councillor Carter has said, presented to the town council again, possibly as a straw man document. That's not a draft anyway, and take it from there. Because at the moment we don't have anything. Really, I don't see this as something that's practical.
I'm happy to.
Yeah. Are we okay with that as an action point, as a starting point? Do we need to vote on it?
I'm happy to propose it as an action.
Yeah, I'm happy to just go ahead. Can we have a second? No. The proposal being that I will just come up with, I would hope no more than a 2-page document, just outlining where sandwiches, what sandwiches emergency plan might start with, taking into account the Resilience Forum, taking into account other councils, but keeping it very short so that we can present this as a starting point for an emergency plan that can be taken and adopted by Sandwich ultimately. Not necessarily that document, but what comes next.
If you're proposing it, I will second it. And we look a bit silly if we don't get something on that website later this year, will we?
Yeah, if we can vote on that. Right, I think we'll move ahead with that. So, are you okay with what I said? Right, are we going to move on from resilience plans to number 11? Anything else anybody wants to say on emergencies? Pesticide use in the butts. A member of the public has raised the matter of the use of pesticides on the butts cricket pitch and suggested a move to a pesticide-free Sandwich. If I can just expand on what has happened there. Lady has written to us to just go back to, I have that particular letter to hand. So saying that the Sandwich Cricket Club had got permission from Dover District Council to apply various pesticides to the cricket pitch. I would imagine mostly it is the bit between the sticky outfits. The stumps, that's it. I don't play cricket.
The cover.
Yeah. Was there a pesticide-free approach to maintaining and managing this grassed area? Now, they have permission. They're using, and I looked up the various pesticides that she's also identified, and they are very focused pesticides. My response to her was, well, I think the initial response described the Dover District Council's approach to the use of pesticides. I think they avoid them, they do avoid using pesticides, but in this particular instance, the cricket club are basically aiming for a standardised grassed area, because if they're hosting other teams, it has to be of a certain nature. They can't sort of say, well, ours has got a few daisies here, a bit of clover here, it is a standard grass pitch. And I can understand them using certain pesticides or herbicides that support that. Councillor Crouch?
Yes, so if this has been agreed by Dover District Council, then Dover District Council would have to look into it, so they don't accept any liability. So they must have given regulatory advice on what pesticides could be used. So, and the idea of having a pesticide-free sandwich is possibly quite a very impossible item to inflict, because private individuals will use whatever they wish to use on their gardens, and Sandwich Town Council has got no authority to reprimand or police who uses what pesticides where.
Councillor Pennington?
Well, thank you.
And then Councillor
What I was going to say. Yes, I agree. I mean, I agree, first of all, to distinguish between pesticides and herbicides. Secondly, most pesticides have been rigorously checked before they can be marketed and used. Thirdly, I think, as you indicated, the Cricket Club has a right to maintain its pitch to a certain standard. If there was evidence that they were using a pesticide that wasn't fully approved and regulated, then I might have some requirements. But at the moment, they've inquired DDC to give them permission.
It's about a year ago, I was approached by a couple of residents regards their dogs being ill, exactly in the same area. And some signs have gone out from the cricket club to warn about treating their pitches. So I had a number of exchanges with the correct people in Dover District Council, and they gave a very clear view, and I've shared it with Councillor Mallet and DDC, who are the people who are putting stuff down in various places around the town, whereas we're not. Their answer is they're not completely pesticide-free as an organisation. They've had numerous FOIs on the matter over the past couple of years, but there is not a viable alternative to chemical usage at present. They undertook some trials with KCC on this matter, using other things like hot foam, whatever that might be, burning and hand removal, but none of those were financially viable.
Sorry, did you say hand?
Hand removal. Well, yeah, it is a good. That's a good point. That's not my draft. It's their draft. I think it might be as in terms of pulling weeds out. But they said, unfortunately, weeds need to be controlled, as they can end up causing damage to structures or can become trip and slip hazards. That was the outcome from Brighton and Hove City Council when they removed all their chemical weed control, but reinstated it when facing significant repair bills and insurance claims. So DDC have looked at it as a challenge. They've had a number of FOIs on it, and they've done what they can, but they are not pesticide free, and they're confident and assured that that is the right approach.
Certainly, replying to the lady that wrote in, I was able to say on my particular property, and I manage about 5 acres, I've removed the pesticides, but the way I manage it is focused on nature managing itself. Cricket pitch isn't that. And I would never expect a cricket pitch to, because it doesn't work. For example, if you have long grass, you have animals living in it, and they eat the weed seeds. Cricket pitch doesn't have any grass.
Cricket's living in it.
So, and also, you say pesticides, fly spray. Everybody uses fly spray.
I don't.
Well, okay.
You just sweat.
Lucky.
No, I don't. I leave everything alone.
You're ahead of me then.
So are you writing back to this lady to just say that we've done our best and investigated this, and there's nothing
Yeah.
further that Sandwich Town Council.
I think basically that I will say it was raised in the committee meeting, and the consensus was with current technology it's not possible.
Not possible.
And the current, the aim of what the cricket club in this case is trying to achieve, it can't be done.
Right. I mean, he's from Dover District Council, so there will be a relationship between Dover District Council and the cricket club in terms of.
Yeah, which has already been passed on to it, but we can emphasise that. Okay, we can move on from there. Number 12, signage in Sandwich. Members to discuss the current state of signage around the town. Who will lead on this?
Just raise that councillor Ian, who's not here today, so
let's
she
be
like to push
fair
it
then.
to the next.
We'll push it to the next meeting.
Yeah.
Councillor
The
Conlon.
only comment I had on this was, because Carol George will know as well, this is something that circulates both the town team, doesn't it? And I have attended the town team and Sandwich Town Council for 18 years. It goes round and round and round, and there's signs from 1964 that are pointing in the wrong direction. And a near neighbour of mine, Kath Gifford, emails me constantly to say, oh, this sign's wrong, that sign's wrong. But of course, Sandwich Town Council hasn't got budget to undertake anything to do with the signs, and Kent County Council for the highway signs will do something, but they would take as long as it takes to get stuff done. So to save us all discussing the signage, this is probably the 12th or 13th time that it's been discussed, and unless we've got any funding, I would suggest that we park this from this.
Yeah.
Are we sure this isn't about the heritage information boards and the glue problem?
No, I think this was.
Okay, thank you. Just for clarification.
Yeah, Councillor.
Yeah, the only thing I would,
Different matter.
the only thing I would say is that Councillor Franklin undertook a survey of signage with Kelly Green from DDC,
Yes.
so that there is some material somewhere that's already been done, and that was about a year ago.
Yeah.
They went round with clipboards and marked down stuff.
And the conservation officer does not like clutter in the town, and she considers unused or unnecessary boards, signs to be clutter. So maybe we should be asking if she can help with the list to remove the clutter. Well, she perhaps has the authority to say to Dover District Council, there is clutter in Sandwich, it's here and here. If council
Perhaps we have
reckons
an action
yes.
to approach Kelly Green and say, do you have this list?
I think one thing that would be very helpful is that the sign's pointed in the right direction.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's quite a few that
Yeah.
don't.
No.
Do you want to bring this back to the next
I think
meeting?
we'll just bring it back to the
Yeah,
next
to
meeting.
mark it
Yeah.
now.
And moving on to number 13, Sandwich Peace Stone. Members to discuss the relocation of the Peace Stone. Councillor Carter.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, the chap that put the Peace Stone in has sort of communicated with me and said that they're hoping to have an anniversary celebration of the Peace Stone, and they were upset it didn't happen last year, but they didn't have the ability to do it. So he was saying that if the Peace Stone, he would prefer the Peace Stone was left where it was, because it was consecrated and dedicated by the Lord Lieutenant and a member, bishop of the clergy. And so he said he would prefer it to stay where it is, but if it was to be moved, it would need access so that a large gathering of persons could congregate at the Peace Stone wherever it went to. So if it does have to be moved, we do need to take into consideration the organisation that gifted the stone to us, which is in particular to remember like the Belgian fallen as well. So I think consideration needs to be taken before we jump to any rash actions.
Yeah, Councillor
So I think that sort of is a nice summary of how things work sometimes in this town, using things like rash decisions. So there are a number of councillors who've said, and a number of residents who've said, why is that stone sitting on the forecourt? And it was a temporary position for it. So I have asked the property manager to look at an alternative, and I've already had a conversation with Chris Russell and an exchange with Paul Graham and Chris Russell. So it's in my hands to deal with, and I don't really like sort of coming around behind me presenting their views, because I will speak with them professionally, and if there is a proposal that is agreed, it will come to the council. And that's how I've already written back to Paul Graham and Chris Russell. So I don't think we need to be overtaken by some sort of other views. So I think we should just leave this at the moment, and I'm dealing with it.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with that.
Yeah, thank you.
Can I just point of order? The point of order is that Councillor Chuka.
Can we?
No, this is a point of order. So you can't overrule me as a chairman.
No.
Councillor Chuka should be careful what he's saying, because the person that I'm talking about, which is Chris Russell, approached me and said because he couldn't be here tonight, could I just explain his requirements? That's all he said. So nobody's, I don't know, going behind.
So Chris
Who's
Russell,
going behind?
Chris Russell,
I'm not going behind.
Chris Russell has got a letter from me that explains exactly where we are. So let's just leave it there for the moment. I'm dealing with it on a professional basis, and I will be approaching Paul Graham and Chris Russell in time to have a conversation with them about the options of what was a temporary solution versus what might be a more suitable permanent solution.
But
And
we'll
it may not move.
That's good, that's good. But it was put down here as a point for discussion. So it was put down here for a point of discussion. You've now closed that discussion off from this committee.
And I've made it clear.
So
I've made it clear that I'm already in conversation with Chris Russell.
So that's all you
and
needed
Paul
to
Graham,
say. That's all you
which is what
needed
I've
to
just
say.
said.
Yeah, as chair, I think we can move on. Thank you very much, both of you, for putting both points of view.
So it shouldn't have been put on the agenda, really, should it?
Number 14, items for information only, matters for the September 2025 meeting. An opportunity for members to request matters for future Heritage and Townscape committee meetings and share information. Is there anything that should be on next agenda?
I don't know whether this is actually for this group, but it was interesting when you had Volunteers Day that they were advertising braille notices, and in Sandwich it's very difficult to read. Well, if you're blind, you can't see our heritage boards or anything about Sandwich, and apparently they actually can provide braille notices that sit next door to your site. And I was just wondering whether at some point this was worth considering.
Yes. Can we raise that at the next meeting?
Yeah.
Can we add that? Yeah. So that's West Kent team. Is that something you can just take a photograph and then?
This, yes, I
mark it?
can.
That's great. And the only thing that I wanted to just raise more to the next meeting is local footpaths and trying to improve the quality. This is something I'm also going to raise at Williamsburg Parish Council. Improve the quality and have some sort of, not necessarily physical ownership in contractual ownership, but local ownership, with the idea of having a competition. And I'm going to want, so I can put it to Dover District Council, because I can't just independently go to Dover District Council, that Sandwich is going to propose that footpaths, where they're privately owned, can compete in some way. I don't know how this would work, but so that those who look after their footpaths as a private individual can actually have some sort of benefit, where the Dover District Council or the District Council says, great, you're doing well, you're the best in the area, or equal, in much the same way as there's various garden schemes, there's organic gardens, there's environmentally friendly gardens, but moving on to the ponds as well. But that's the next meeting.
I just have one item which is actually quite very urgent, is I think this committee should be discussing the gullies and drains, which Kent County Council used to have a regime for, and then they stopped the regime, clearing the gullies and drains, and they said, Councillor Chandler said, we're just waiting for members of the public to tell us which gullies and drains are full, and then we'll send a vehicle out to them. Well, I'm sure there's several people in this room who have had drains that have been overflowing recently that need to be clearing.
Yeah.
So I think it's the duty of Housebound Council to address this problem and raise it with Kent County Council and get them to pull their finger in.
Can I just mention briefly in passing, because it's vaguely similar, sort of, but if you walk down Del Street, where Del Stream is, I don't know if you've noticed as you walk past, I can't think of the name of the house, but it's a double-fronted yellow.
Horseshoe.
No, past that. Nearly opposite us, but
Oh yes.
slightly
Yeah.
round it.
Yeah.
The Del Stream is absolutely full, and I mean full of rubbish. It is obscene. Bearing in mind that's part of the town trail, it has been reported to Dover, nothing has happened.
So maintenance of Del Stream, clearly.
Yeah, it is really appalling. I've never seen it so bad. It's just really bad.
Can I just give an update on drains?
Yes, I know.
So first of all, that happened the first time we had an issue, and then we also had it repeated this weekend. I've been in contact with our KCC councillor, Councillor Evans, and he's been given a list from me because I collated a lot of residents' feedback, and he has promised, he's got contact details for each of these individual properties and the owners, etc. And he says he will be going out and speaking and contacting those individuals in terms of the treatment. But I think there's a longer term issue about what is KCC doing in terms of drains, because they have a strategy which involves only clearing drains on either a 1 year, a 2 year or a 3 year cycle. But residents are saying that's not even done in any case. They will not come out if you say there's a drain blocked. I've got a very, very obvious one on Strand Street, and they haven't come out, and they won't come out until August because it's not on the schedule. So that is what is their current position. If we can change that at all with our KCC council, that's brilliant, but I think we're fighting a bit of a tidal wave on this, to use an appropriate analogy, because of the costs that they're not willing to invest in dealing with.
Yeah, again, drains, so Del Stream and drains. I think as much as anything, so that it shows that we are
fishing
discussing
rod,
these
like
things.
David Silk and people do along the
Okay.
New Street along there. They use fishing rods.
I've been using this.
Yeah,
Another
absolutely.
15. Moving on, date and time of next meeting, 10th September 2025. So,
September.
yes. Yes. Yeah.
2 months away.
Yeah. 2 months.